Today should be a relatively simple, lesson, easy for me to say. All we're going to do is learn about positive and negative integers. Why are we doing this? So you can represent both good and bad things that happen mathematically. You can associate numbers with them. And you'll know you got it if you can put the correct sign in front of the numbers. So once again, today we've given you guys packets. Half of it is actually taken out of your modules, but we've just put it all together to make it easier so we don't spend 10 minutes trying to put it in the right order. Okay, because we're going to go back and forth between the two. In math, we have different sets of numbers, and each set of numbers has its own name. It refers specifically to a specific set of numbers. You guys are used to dealing with whole numbers. Whole numbers are numbers that just have a whole value. 1, 2, 3, 8, 20, all those are whole numbers. Up to now, that's primarily what you have focused on. You have also been dealing with some rational numbers. Rational numbers include the numbers in between those whole numbers. So stuff like decimals and fractions, those are included in the set of rational numbers. Today, we're going to expand that to include integers. Integers are basically your whole numbers, but both the positive and negative values, as well as the number 0. So an integer is a whole number positive or negative and 0. So 0 is kind of our dividing line between the positives and the negatives. We'll talk about that as we continue. That is a 0, yes. Yes, I do the line through my zeros to differentiate between the zeros and the O's. So if you see that line, that means it is a 0, not an O. Now, let's talk about some words that mean positive and negative things, because this is really what we're getting to. Is in Engage New York, they like to use a lot of financial terms, so we'll make sure we include these. But we want things that when you think of the word and you associate it with a number, would it be a positive number or a negative number? Kaylee? I have hands. And 0. So I'll start you off. If I say add, is that going to be positive or negative? Positive. Now, most of the time, these are also going to have a counterpoint. So what would be the counter to adding? Subtract. So that would be a negative, right? So if I subtract from something, that's going to be a negative. Okay, a couple of math terms, banking terms, financial terms that we use. One is if I put money into my account, what do we call that? No, withdrawing is actually taking the money out. So we'll do the negative first. Right. But then Kaylee gave the negative one. Depositing. So the opposite of a withdrawal would be a deposit. Here's one that gets really confusing. So we want to make sure this one is clear to you. That is a credit. Is a credit a positive or a negative? Why do you say negative? Good. So here's why this is confusing, because what he just described is a credit card. A credit card is basically a little piece of plastic that says, hey, I'm taking an instant loan from you at an exorbitant interest rate. Most credit cards have rates anywhere from 12 to 30%. Really crazy. Okay? But that is a credit card. But to actually give a credit, especially since we live here in Okinawa, and Matthew, you guys have seen this a lot. Your parents order something from Amazon. It gets here and it either doesn't fit or they decide they don't like it or it just never shows up. Well, they've already paid for it, right? So when they get a hold of Amazon, Amazon actually gives them a credit or they put the money back in their account. So credit is actually a positive. Now, the opposite of that, and this is one your parents probably use quite commonly at the commissary or the BX, debit. Okay? So when they ask debit or credit, they're asking, are you taking it directly out of your account, a debit, or are you using a credit card or an instant loan, which is also a negative. But a credit itself is positive. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. We have any football players in here? That's okay. You understand the concept. If I have a play and I have positive yards, I say I did what? Gaining. Okay. So the positive would be gain. The opposite would be losing yards or a loss of yards, right? Okay. What about elevation? We talk about elevation. How do we talk about it? Floating in the air would be what? That's levitating. Elevation is talking about relative position. So higher, lower. Okay, so which one would be bigger? Positive is higher. Negative would be lower. Two other words we use for that would be above or below, up or down. Those ones don't really have a positive or negative because it's just repeated addition. So I guess if you were forced to put it on a side, multiplication I guess would be positive. Division would be negative because that's repeated subtraction. Does this make sense? Any other words you guys think we should add in here? Ms. McShannon, anything we missed? Sophie? Okay, we talked about that one, but the problem is multiplying and dividing by themselves don't necessarily mean a positive or a negative. If you were to say multiplying would probably go on the positive side because it's repeated addition. Yes. Sure. So if I do a give would be what? Yes. I'm sure you do, but we shouldn't. Micah said, shouldn't we do stealing as well? I said, you might, but we probably shouldn't. Avi? Avi? Okay. So we can do that. So a negative, digging, I'm going down. Filling, I'm putting stuff in. Okay, so let's talk about our number lines real quick. When we build a number line now, our 0 should be in the center depending on the number set. I'll give that caveat. Sometimes it's all positive or all negative numbers. You don't have to include 0 on your number line. But anything to the right of 0, these are our positives. Anything to the left of 0, these are our negatives, which is why we did those words on the sides we did to try to help you see in relationship where they are. This is what we call a horizontal number line. So if we ask you to do something on a horizontal number line, this is what we're asking for. The other type of number line that we will commonly use is what we call a vertical number line. A vertical number line, same thing. The 0 will normally be in the center. Quick side note, your number should be on the left side, not on the right. And as we go up, 1, 2, whatever your interval is, negatives go down. Okay? So this is what we call a vertical number line. Now, once we start getting into operations, which we actually won't do this year, but to help you conceptualize operations, a lot of times it's easier to think about it on a vertical number line because that one kind of makes more sense if I'm which direction I'm moving, up or down for positive or negative. Any questions on anything we covered so far? Okay. Next, we're talking about graphing numbers. Now, this sounds really basic, but it's amazing the number of kids who do this wrong. So we want to make sure everybody understands what the expectation is. When I graph a number, I find its location on the number line, and at that point, right on the number line, I draw in a filled circle. So you notice how that is on the line right where that crosshatch is? Basically, you should be covering up that crosshatch, guys. Shouldn't be above, shouldn't be below, shouldn't be even a little bit above or below. It needs to be right at the number line at that spot. So that would be -1. 3 would go right here. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to give you guys a second. Try to practice. Graph those next 4 numbers, -3, 5, -2, and 2. We'll give you a minute. Okay, this one should have been easy, I'm hoping. -3, should have put your dot right here. 5, it should go right here. -2, dot should go right here. 2, dot should go right there. Again, make sure it's right on the line. Don't go above it. Questions on how you plot a point? That's technically what we just did. Okay, so let's read quick review. The sign of an integer that is what if the number is greater than 0? Positive. If it is positive, do I put a little plus sign? No. If it's positive, I just write the number. Okay? So if I don't see a sign, the assumption is that it is positive. The sign of an integer is what if the number is less than 0? Negative. Okay? Now, this next part, our instructions say generate an integer for each situation. What that's saying is make a number that would actually represent what's happening. So if I have a gain of 17 yards, what integer would I write to represent that? 17. Because it's positive, I don't need to include a positive sign, correct? Okay? Because if it's a gain of 17 yards, that's a positive thing. So the number that represents that would be 17. No? Gain is telling you it's positive. Make sense? Okay, the opposite of 8. Good. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but for now, okay, do the next 4. I'll give you 1 minute. And, okay, what integer is a withdrawal of $67? Zuriel? Good, -67. It says a withdraw. So withdrawing means I'm taking the money out. My bank account balance is going down. Nope, that's a deposit. 2 below par. Now, guys, please quiet down because we need a whole separate conversation on this because Engaged New York does use this relatively commonly, but it also gets to another very important concept. Any golfers in here? Oh, good. We actually have a few. What is, guys? Aaron, you're not a golfer. You shouldn't be talking. What is par? What is par? Bella? Okay, do you know what it is for an 18-hole course? It's higher. So par is the number of shots it should take you to make it on any specific hole. A regulation 18-hole golf course is designed to take 72 shots. So when I say I finished 2 below par, does that mean I got around the course with -2 shots? No, how many shots did it take me to go around the entire course? Zuriel? Nora? 70. Because par, guys, come on now. Par is 72. So it's expected for me to take 72 shots to get all the way around the course. If I say I finished 2 below par, that means I actually did it in just 70 shots. Micah, stop. So this gets to an entirely different concept, which is this idea. We always think of 0 as nothing, right? But now, because we are going to be talking about comparing and ordering integers, 0 is actually a movable thing. 0 is just our starting point. So, for example, when I withdrew $67, does that mean my bank account is now a minus 67? No, it's at 0. Is that 0?
It doesn't tell you how much money you have in the bank account. It's just you subtract 67 from the total.
Good. So, for those of you that didn't hear what Ayana just said, that 67 is just in reference to some starting points. That starting point, when we talk about our bank accounts, is what we call a starting balance. Okay? So if my starting balance was 100 and I withdrew 67, what would my account balance actually be now? 33. Does that make sense? So are you guys understanding this concept of a floating 0 or a starting point? So when I talk about par, it's at 72 for a regulation course. If I was talking about 1 hole, say it was normally if I'm minus 2, that's going to be a 5 par. So that means I made that hole in 3 shots. So I was 2 below par for the hole. Okay? Does that make sense? Anybody having troubles with it? Madison.
Where did you get 3 from for me?
I didn't. It said negative 2.
You just said you're like 2 minus par or something.
Right. I said if I was on a hole that's expected to take 5 shots, and I did that hole at 2 below par, that would mean I took 3 shots to get in the pin.
And how come we didn't put so why did we put 2 here? I don't know why. I thought we were going to put 7.
Because what's 2 below? How do I represent that? Negative 2, because it's 2 below. Mateo, guys, you guys are right here, so we're picking all you guys up. Okay, what about 10 feet below sea level? JJ? Negative 10? 25 feet above sea level? 25. Which gets us to another concept, one that we will commonly use in elevation. That is the concept of sea level. Now, I live right here on Baba Beach. When it is low tide, we have this wonderful reef that you can actually walk all the way out. There's just one small piece you can't go on because it's a deep channel. When it's high tide, I look out and I see nothing but water all the way across there. When I first moved in, apparently it was high tide because I went out snorkeling, one of the first things I did, and I'm out there swimming, and all of a sudden, I'm like almost scraping bottom. It really took me by surprise. As I was coming back, it got to low tide. I actually had to stand up and walk across the reef to get back. So when I say sea level, is it when I can see my reef, or is it when I'm swimming over it? It's actually kind of a median in between. But sea level is just a concept. So when we discuss elevation, this is 0 in terms of elevation. Okay? So in other words, anytime I talk about height or how low something is, we will talk about it in terms of in comparison to sea level. Sea level is just our floating 0 in terms of elevation. That being said, there is a sea level that they've determined. It's between high and low tide. And actually, if you go on any of the tide charts, it will tell you how high and low it gets compared to sea level, what the deviation is. Okay, any questions on this first page? We threw a lot of concepts at you. The floating 0, the starting balance of par, elevation being a floating 0 at sea level. So here's where we're going to start using some sea level stuff. Okay, we're going to compare 3 guys. We have this dude. He's hiking, so he is above sea level. We have the sailor. She is at sea level, so the boat is right there. Your scuba diver is below sea level, so he's down below the ship. So using those concepts, if I said the scuba diver is 30 feet below sea level, what integer would I use to represent that? Negative 30. The sailor is at sea level. What integer would I use for that? Kaylee, are you getting this written down? That's hard to believe since both of your hands are involved with whatever that was. And the hiker is 2 miles or 10,560 feet above sea level. There's actually two I could use, right? I could say he's 2 miles or 10,560 feet. Either one of those would work. Okay, so we just did number one. I just like doing it on the page. We got the picture. We already did. We just did it on the other page. Okay, so number two. Use an appropriate scale to graph each of the following situations on the number line to the right. Also, write an integer to represent both situations. So we got two things we need to do. We need to graph the 2 points, and we need to write an integer for them. So our two situations. A hiker is 15 feet above sea level. A diver is 20 feet below sea level. So given that my things that I'm going to put on my number line are 15 and 20, what interval should I use? Why 5, Wesley? Good. They're both multiples of 5, so 5 makes sense, right? If I've only got this much space to do 50, 15, and 20, do I want to do it by ones? No. Okay, so when we're doing a number line like this, again, a vertical number line, our number should be on the left. We just decided on an interval of 5, so that means as I go up, I'm going to go 5 in between each level. And I'll do the same thing as I go down. One thing I really want you to notice, as I go down, I start at -5 and go down, right? Okay? So 0 is that center point. I count in both directions from there. So now we're supposed to plot these 2 points. Let's do our integer first. If a hiker is 15 feet above sea level, what integer would I use for that? 15. So where is that going to be on my number line? Right where the 15 is. And we should label it. I'm going to put H for hiker, or you can put A for part A, whichever you want to do. Now, what integer would I use for my scuba diver who's 20 feet below? Emma? -20. So where is that going to be on my number line? Where it says -20. Again, make sure your dot is directly on your line, not to the left or the right, not above or below the 20. Yeah, it would. When I graph the point, it should be right on the number line. Okay? Questions? Did we do everything we needed to for this one? Madison?
You don't have to color in the circle in the whole line, the 5 is a line next to it.
Yeah.
Do you have to put cover up that line with the circle, or do you just put it
For 5, we don't have any. At 15,
yeah, 15.
at 15, yes. It needs to cover up the line. It needs to be all the way around it. At 15? Shouldn't be, because that circle's right over top of it. Well, yeah, you can see it to the sides. That's fine. That's showing you where that interval is. Should I draw big enough that it covers up those intervals? I would say no, because you want to see exactly where it is. Okay, this next one gets a little interesting. So you need to listen to the directions to make sure you understand what to do. So on this one, for each statement, there are two related statements, 1 and 2. Determine which related statement is expressed correctly and circle it. Then correct the other related statement so that both parts are stated correctly. So you've got two parts. Determine which one is true, and then correct the other statement. So you're going to read the information, and then you're going to read each of those two pieces. One of them is correct, stated correctly. You circle that one. The other one, you need to change it to make it correct. Okay? So we'll give you guys 3 minutes to do these two.
All right, you were supposed to figure out which one was correct and which one was not correct and fix it. A says a submarine is submerged 800 feet below sea level. So 1, the depth of the submarine is negative 800 feet below sea level. Or 2, 800 feet below sea level can be represented by the integer negative 800. Who thinks number 1 is correct? Who thinks number 2 is correct? Number 2 is correct. Who can tell me why number 1 is incorrect? Yes. I'm going to explain what she said. She said they gave it a negative sign and they said below sea level. That's a double negative, guys. You can't have a double negative. If you have a double negative, because this represents negative and this represents negative, they cancel each other out and they become positive. So in reality, that statement is now saying that the depth of the submarine is 800 feet above sea level. You can't do that. So to fix this, you would take off the negative sign and just write the depth of the submarine is 800 feet below sea level. Because below sea level already means negative. Got it? So let's look at B. The elevation of a coral reef with respect to sea level is given as negative 150 feet. 1, the coral reef is 150 feet below sea level. Or 2, the depth of the coral reef is negative 150 feet below sea level. Who thinks number 1 is correct? Who thinks number 2 is correct? Yes, number 1 is correct. And who can tell me why 2 is not correct? Nate? Yes, he said it has a double negative because it has a negative sign and it has below sea level. So to fix this one, you would just rewrite it without the negative sign. Any questions? All right, let's look at the next page. Now we're going to get into absolute value of integers. We know integers are negative and positive whole numbers, yes? So the absolute value of these whole numbers is how far they are away from 0. So that's the definition of absolute value. The distance the integer is from 0. For example, if we have negative 9, how many units away from 0 is negative 9? It is 9 units. So my absolute value is 9. Here's a hint. Absolute value is always positive. It is always positive. We started with -9, but we don't count by negative units. We count by positive units, yes? So our absolute value will always be positive. These two bars mean absolute value. So anytime you see those two bars on the outside of a number, it means to find the absolute value. Got it? So let's look at number 1 at the bottom. What is the absolute value of positive 5? 5. It is 5 units from 0. What about the absolute value of negative 13? Yes, it is 13 units away from 0. Okay, I want you to do 3 through 8. Now, number 6 and number 8 are going to test your thinking ability. I want you to try your best. Got it? Okay, you have about 2 minutes. All right, number 3. What is the absolute value of 2? Yes, it is 2 units from 0. What is the absolute value of negative 11? 11. What is the absolute value of 7? Let's jump to number 7 and then we'll come back to number 6. What is the absolute value of negative 14? 14. Now, 6 and 8 both have something new. They have a minus sign or a negative sign outside of the absolute value. Yes? So this represents the opposite of. So what is the opposite of the absolute value of negative 4? Hold on. Let's start with what is the absolute value of negative 4? 4. So what is the opposite of that? Negative 4. But the absolute value is always positive. But if they're asking for the opposite of the absolute value, it will be negative. So let's look at 8. What is the absolute value of 10? 10. But this means what is the opposite of that? Negative 10. Any questions about the opposite of or absolute value? Okay.
Okay, guys, so that gets us to our next definition, which is the definition of opposites. We've already said it like 4 times, so I think you guys are getting the idea. But let's put a mathematical definition to it. So what do you think you would now define as an opposite? Huh? Oh, careful, reciprocal has its own special one, right? That's the flipping. That's an inverse. So you had the right idea, though, because what am I doing on the opposite? I'm changing the... So what do I use to show that? If it's left or right of 0, how do I know? How do I know, looking at a number, if it's to the left of 0 or to the right of 0? Horizontal, because of the sign. So in an opposite, it's the same number with the opposite sign. So in other words, if it was positive, it's now negative. If it was negative, it's now positive. All I'm doing is changing the sign. I actually keep the number exactly like it is. Now, key note here. 0 is its own opposite. Yep, it's the same number with the opposite sign. That's all it is for opposite. So if it's positive, I keep the number, I just change it from positive to negative. If it's negative, I keep the number, I just change it from negative to positive. Okay? So given that, now provide its opposite. You've got 4 of them to do. I'll give you 1 minute. Okay, guys, the opposite of -1. The opposite of 4. The opposite of -7. The opposite of 0. Remember, 0 is its own opposite. It don't have a positive or negative 0. No, there is no -0. -0 doesn't exist. Okay, our next one, we're going to be able to use a number line just to help you visualize what this means. So what is the absolute value of 3? 3. To visualize it, I put a mark at 3. So I graph number 3. I just count from 0. How many did it go? 1, 2, 3. It's 3 away from 0. What is the absolute value of -5? 5. So same deal. If I start at -5 and I plot my point, I can just count, and I would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Takes 5 spaces to get to 0. Guys, that's literally all absolute value is. Yes? Do what? What happened to your pencil? I'm going to borrow a pencil. You have 2 of them there. Okay, so turn the page. Okay, you guys should be looking at this page right here. It says problem set. Okay? Jonah, you were on the page. Go back. Okay, it starts a problem set. Now, this is not hard.
It says homework.
But we're going to do it in class. Would you rather do it now? Or do you want me to save it for homework? Okay. Guys, quiet down. I'm not going to write it. We will make it homework if you guys want to talk. Otherwise, we'll do it together. This first part, all we need to do, write an integer to match the following descriptions. So a debit of $40. Is a debit a good thing or a bad thing? Good thing. They're putting money in my account. That's good. So the integer would be positive 40. A deposit of $225. Deposit is deposit's putting money in my account. Luna? Nope, it's putting money in my account. $225. That's a positive. Yes, ma'am? Yeah? Oh, it does say debit. Negative. Thank you, Nora. I don't know. Okay, 14,000 feet above sea level. 14,000. Temperature increase of 40. 40. A withdrawal of 225. Negative 225. 14,000 feet below sea level. Negative 14,000. Okay, we kind of did one like this next section. Directions are a little different though, so let's read them. So read each statement about a real world and the 2 related statements in parts A and B. Circle the correct way to describe each situation. Possible answers. It could be A, it could be, or it could be both A and B. Sure. Although I don't think it's going to help. Okay, guys, number 2. How many thought A was correct? Raise your hand. How many thought B was correct? Raise your hand. A. The whale is 600 feet below the surface. The depth of the whale is 600 feet from the ocean surface. So when it says depth, it's saying down. So that is correct. the whale is minus 600 feet below. So again, we have that double negative. Minus 600 below would actually put it above. And a whale at 600 feet would be very intimidating. Okay, the elevation at the bottom of an iceberg with respect to sea level is given as negative 125 feet. So 125 feet above sea level? No. 125 feet below. Nora? Good. Okay, Alex's body temperature decreased by 2 degrees. How many think A is correct? Raise your hand. Nobody? Raise your hand if you think A is correct. Okay, now we got about half. How many think B is correct? Okay, let's try this again. Raise your hand if A is correct. Okay, hands down. Raise your hand if you think B is correct. Yes, both of them are good. Okay? Guys, listen up. So in part A, it said the word dropped 2 degrees because it went down. That is absolutely correct. The second one, it broke it apart. It said the integer -2 would represent his body temperature. It went down, so -2 is the correct integer. Making sense? Okay, so bell's about to ring. We'll finish number 5 once we come back from lunch. Okay, we're on number 5 now. So on number 5, we have a credit of $35 and a debit of $40 applied to your bank account. So again, credit of $35, is that good or bad? Good, it means they're putting money back in. Debit of $40, is that good or bad? Bad, okay? Now, what is an appropriate scale to graph a credit of 35 and a debit of 40? Explain your reasoning. So if I'm going to be doing put these on a number line, what scale should I use? Why 5? Good. Do I want to do ones, guys, if I'm doing positive 35 to negative 40? No. Okay, so 5 because it goes into both numbers. So that would be our explanation for the reasoning. So we want to use 5 as our scale because it goes into both numbers evenly. Now, what integer represents a credit of 35 if 0 represents the original balance? And explain. So a credit of 35 would be 35 because what does a credit do? A credit adds money. So because I'm adding money to my account, that would be a positive. Okay? Part C, what integer describes a debit of $40 if 0 represents the original balance? Negative 40, because I'm going to write it up here to make it easier for you guys to see. Because a debit takes money from the account. So part D, based on our scale, describe the position of location of both integers on the number line. So where would they be? So where would it be? Describe it on the number line. But what scale did we use? Part A. So where would it actually be? Which way? Up or? If we're doing horizontal. Okay. The credit is going to be Right, because it's positive. Okay? So our credit is 7 spaces right of 0. Debit is how far left? 8, because it's 40. That's okay. It almost came out as 8 when you said 7. Good job, JJ. And that one is going to be to the left of 0. So because of our scale, we're talking about our scale of using 5 for every interval. To get to 35, it's going to be 7 to the right of 0. To get to negative 40, it's going to be 8 to the left of 0. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody not see it? Okay. Now, in this case, what does 0 represent? What about the bank account?
The bank account without either addition or subtraction of the money.
Do you remember what we called that? No, it is the C level of our bank account, but what is the financial term for it? We wrote it down. We talked about it before. I don't think we wrote it down yet. The starting balance. Okay? So it's our starting balance. So when we're talking about bank accounts and talking about withdrawing or depositing, we start from our starting balance. So every bank account will be different. Like Ms. McShann, it's like 100,000. Mine's $100. A little bit different. Okay? Nope. She just paid a lot more than I do. She's been teaching for longer, and she has a master's. I haven't finished my master's yet. Sure, we'll go with that.
Were you still in college?
I am still in college. Okay, guys, let's go to the next page. Should have the little smiley face on it. Guys, please quiet back down. The little thinking face, not smiley face. Okay, name 2 integers whose absolute value is 12. Raise your hand once you think you have 2 integers whose absolute value is 12. You have it in your mind. 2 integers whose absolute value is 12. Raise your hand when you've got it. 2 of them. Can't be just one. I need 2 integers whose absolute value is 12. JJ, you think you got this one? So your hand was up for nothing? Nora? 12 and negative 12. Well, it was wrong when you didn't say it. Guys, quiet back down. Jonah. Okay, our next one, we're actually going to go through a process. This is talking about what is the value of the expression. In other words, what does it equal? Think of each negative sign as an opposite of. So this is kind of like order of operations. We start in the middle, and we work our way out. So if I start at the middle, what number am I starting with? Negative 7. You should be able to see that.
I mean, because you write the number line and you gotta put 0 in the middle. So.
True. But this expression has already been written. So we're starting in the center of this one, in the middle of all the parentheses. So as I work my way out, what is the opposite of negative 7? 7. What is the opposite of 7? Negative 7. What is the opposite of negative 7? So what is the value of this expression?
Are we gonna have extra stuff?
There will probably be a question like this. Yeah.
Yeah, you're counting the parentheses.
Okay. Guys, do you understand the process we just went through on that, though? Basically, every time I see the negative sign, I'm just saying opposite. So I'm going to the opposite side of the number line, bouncing back and forth between those two values. Now, here's some partner work for you. We'll give you guys a couple minutes to do this together. We're going to use this information. I will give you a hint. Here is my boat, right? So we already talked about what does the level of that boat represent? Sea level, and you know the number that goes with that, right? Okay. This is what we call a mast. So when it says the guy is on the mast, they're talking about that. Okay? So that should give you enough information to figure this out. I will give you a hint. It may help you to actually plot everything here on the boat before you do the problem. But we'll give you guys 3 minutes to knock this one out. Okay, first step on this one to make it easy. If I climb 6 feet up the mast, part A is going to be right up here. So there's A. Dove 6 feet under. So B is going to be that same distance in the other direction. At the water level is C. So there's our C. D is halfway in between. Okay, which one is the lowest? B. At the highest, A has the same absolute value as if you were 6 feet underwater. A. Situations have the greatest absolute value. A and B. So it's both of them. To plot them, guys, quiet down. So -6 was the B. -3 was D. Sea level, or 0, was C. And A was our highest point at 6. So again, when you plot your points, make sure that your dot is directly on the line right at that cross tag. Make sure you label it. Put the letter above it. Yes, Madison?
What did you say that D meant?
D was where you were 3 feet under the surface.
Okay. I thought it meant dove.
No. Okay, because of time, I'm going to run through these next two together with you. Yeah, we still got to go over all the instructions and hand back the quiz. Guys. Okay, on this one, Jeremy, Alicia, and Edgar are playing a game where the object is to get closest to 0. If Jeremy has -250, Alicia has -150, Edgar has 300, who is the winner? Basically, what we're saying is which one has the smallest absolute value. In other words, which one's closest to 0? Alicia. Okay, Alicia is closest to 0. What two numbers have an absolute value of 6? 6 and -6. So hopefully these absolute value questions aren't going to cause any confusion. Questions on anything we have covered so far, guys? Okay, let's turn the page, start looking at the homework. Okay, so this left side is your first piece. Because I'm not going to talk over you. So if you guys start talking again, I'm just going to stop and we'll have silence on the video. You guys will have issues finishing this up. Determine which number is closer to 0. Use the number line to help you determine each answer. Do you have to use the number line?
No.
It says help you. So you can if you need to. But if you can look at the numbers and understand which one has a smaller absolute value, in other words, which one's closer to the 0, that should be fine. So in other words, what's the absolute value of 4? 4. What's the absolute value of negative 5? 5. So which one's closer to 0? Okay. Overall, should be really simple. I'll give you a heads up. One of them gets tricky because it's the same. Our next part, write the opposite of each situation. It will be beneficial for you if you write down the number first and then the opposite number, but then write the situation. So if it's 50 feet above sea level, what number would that be? 50. What's its opposite? Negative 50. In words, talking about sea level, what would that be? That's why we're giving you an example. So the opposite would be 50 feet below sea level. Does that make sense? Okay. Hope you, and if you have issues, you can look back to page 1 where we put the opposite words if there's a few of these words you don't quite feel comfortable with. Okay, the next part, find the absolute value of each number. That one should be very straightforward. Numbers 1 and 2, again, pretty straightforward. I will say, make sure you read the questions carefully. And the order that they're in does matter. So you got to think about where we're starting and what the total is, okay? Then turn over to the last page. Here's where it can get a little confusing, so I want to take some time on this. Now, on this part, find the opposite of each number and describe its location on the number line. So there's 2 pieces to this. What is the opposite of negative 5? 5. Describe its location on a number line. Where would I find 5? Which way? Right. Okay. So 5 spaces right of 0. Does that make sense? You understand how to describe the location? Okay. Our next part, we have 2 pieces to this. Write the opposite of each number and label the points on the number line. So there's 2 pieces. So point A, what is the opposite of 9? Negative 9. Now I need to label it, meaning I draw it on the number line at negative 9, and I label it. That is point A. Does everybody understand what you're supposed to do on the second section? Okay. Our third section. Study the first example. Write the integer that represents the opposite of each real-world situation. And then in words, write the meaning of the opposite. So there's 2 pieces. Write the integer and the meaning of the opposite. So our first one says an atom's positive charge of 7. So the opposite would be what? Negative 7. In words, talking about an atom. What am I now talking about? Good. An atom's negative charge of 7. Does this make sense? Does everybody understand what you're to do on part 3? Okay? Now, 4 and 5, we go kind of quickly because we got to get your quizzes back. On a number line, locate and label a credit of 38 and a debit for the same amount. What does 0 represent in this situation? So there's 2 parts to this, right? Credit, good or bad? Good. Debit, good or bad? Bad. What is 0 in this situation? What's that word we've been using?
The balance chart thingy.
Not account balance. Starting balance. Wow, Micah got one right today. No, Micah's normally pretty good. No, really. Okay, so make sure you label them on your graph appropriately. That one was pretty easy because they only gave you 1 interval to each one. On a number line, locate and label 40 degrees below 0 and 40 degrees above 0. What does 0 represent in the situation? So the big one on this one, look at how many intervals you have. So you have to determine an appropriate interval to get both 40 and negative 40 on your line. But one of the keys on this one, what does 0 represent? What is 0 degrees Celsius? Scientifically, what does that represent? It is cold. Freezing temperatures of a specific substance. Water. So 0 in this case is the freezing point of water. Make sense? Any questions on your homework? So you know it's 2 pages. You know none of this is really hard. It should not take you long, okay?